So good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Rogers. I'm with the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce. And today we have Katrina Boyer. She is an investor education coordinator with the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. Today she'll be talking about investment frauds you need to know. So Katrina, thanks so much. And we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And thank you all of you for participating in today's session. As Victoria indicated, we're going to be talking about investment frauds. And the reality is that investment frauds, I like to say, are a dime a dozen. But some of them we kind of already know about. We know about Ponzi schemes, Affinity Fraud, and maybe you've heard of free lunch scams. We're going to talk about those, but then we're going to move into something that's a little bit more intense. And we will be talking about pump and dump scams, promissory note scams, and prime bank schemes. So we'll talk about that stuff that we kind of have heard about, we know a little bit more about. We'll move into something that's a little deeper, and then we'll talk about sort of the red flags of investment scams and other types of scams that we need to be aware of. And then I always like to provide resources, because while an hour really is a great amount of time for me to be able to share information, the reality is that we are only able to cover so much. So I think it's important that we explore the resources that I'm going to provide. So please make sure that you take that into consideration. I will be sending to Victoria a PDF version of today's slides so that you don't have to try to get to write down all of the different websites that I'm going to refer to, because I'll send them to Victoria and then she can forward them out to the group. But as Victoria noted in the chat, I am always open to questions. I prefer that you put them in the chat and we can answer those individually once we've finished presenting. So without further, let's go ahead and get started. So a Ponzi scheme, we often call them a pyramid scheme. It is an investment opportunity, in quotes, that promises these huge rates of return, and they tell you that you're guaranteed not to lose any money. So when we think about that, the reality is that the people who get into that Ponzi scheme early on are the ones who are going to make money. And they'll make that money until we run out of new investors to bring more money so that the early on investors are able to be paid. Ponzi schemes were named after Charles Ponzi from the 1920s. But the reality is there's actually not a real business. So oftentimes you'll hear about, here's this opportunity. There was a video that I was watching about a Ponzi scheme that involved commercial cookware, where the person who was committing the scam actually claimed that he was able to sell this cookware to culinary schools for thousands of dollars. But the reality was he was taking the investors' money, using it to pay for his lavish lifestyle. And then as new investors came in, he used that new money to continue to pay for that lifestyle, but then he paid returns on investments to those first few layers of individuals. But the reality is eventually we run out of new investors. And when that happens, that pyramid kind of comes crashing in on itself. So we want to remember that with a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme, money is paid to those original investors, and then eventually it collapses. They do promise these great returns that are much higher than other investments. And so that needs to be a red flag. And as I said, we'll be talking about red flags throughout today's session. So perhaps the most commonly known Ponzi scheme artist was Bernie Madoff. And one of the things that I think is fascinating with him was that he actually started off as a legitimate investment professional, but he got greedy and eventually he was committing a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme. But the reality was, as I said, since he was a legitimate businessman, he actually had multiple sets of financial records. He had the one that he showed to the regulators, but then he had the ones that he had for the investors. And then there was the reality of what was happening with him. So that's something that we need to be really aware of, that, you know, things aren't always exactly what they seem. Eventually, Mr. Madoff pled guilty to more than 11 felony charges. And what I thought was amazing is that he got absolutely no leniency. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison. Now, you probably know that he passed away this year, but he died in prison. So I think that's really cool. But I want to bring it back to something that happened here in Pennsylvania. So there was Jan Luan, who was considered the Polka King. Jan Luan spent, it was charged eventually with stealing $5 million from fans and investors in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. And he was from the Scranton area. So I thought that was really interesting. You can see here how he was sentenced. He did end up serving 5 years total because he was able to do his sentences concurrently. But I do want to share with you a video because, you know, one of the things that I've discovered as I've been doing investor education is that it's not always easy to spot those scam artists. Jan Luan's a prime example. And while I could talk about him for a really long time, I want to share with you a movie clip because they actually made a movie regarding his Ponzi scheme that he committed, and you can actually find it on Netflix. It's called The Polka King, and I'm going to go ahead and play this video clip because it's a great movie. It's very entertaining, and the reality was when I watched it the first time, it really drove home to me how Ponzi schemes, how we can become victims of Ponzi schemes. So I'm just going to play this short video for us, and we'll go on from there.
Now, Jan, you always have so much going. You're constantly on the road with the
Whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen.
band. You've got the store, the record label, the radio program, Jan Levon flavored vodka,
And now Jan Levon European tours. Jan Levon always expanding. When I was little boy in Poland, all the times I dreaming of America. Your invest helped build all my business.
You cannot go wrong with this man. He never stops.
We went in.
We all get rich.
I heard that people are investing money with you.
Yes, come see me at the show. Great job out there, Lonnie. We did real good manage today.
Mr. Lewan, do you know why I'm here?
Yes. It's very good investment to help build empire.
Oh, no. I'm not here to invest. What you're doing is illegal. As of today, you have to give all that money back to your investors.
Today or some other today? How I make all this money?
We want to invest more in Jan Lewin show gifts.
Something's going on.
No, nothing on. Everything good.
If you do anything to hurt this family, I will destroy you.
Okay.
Are you in trouble?
No. I just need to fill out papers and forms.
We're pulling our money out.
Bribes are being alleged.
This business stinks.
You were greedy! You only have yourselves to blame! There's something very wrong with you!
It's America. We all get second chance.
Okay, so the reality is it's a hysterical movie, but I hope that you were able to see how you know, friends told friends, and all of a sudden everybody's wanting to invest. And I think that in this situation, you know, it started off innocent enough, and eventually it just got completely out of control. And So what I think is really cool is the gentleman that told Jan Luan that he had to repay all that money while he was an actor in the show. That actually was someone from the Pennsylvania Department of, or excuse me, it was from the Pennsylvania Securities Commission that went in and said, you know, this is a problem. You're not following the rules. But if you're interested in learning more about how Ponzi schemes can kind of get carried away, this is a really great movie to be able to do that. So I hope that you'll consider checking that out. But I think that one of the things that kind of goes hand in hand with, particularly with a Ponzi scheme, is affinity fraud. So affinity fraud sort of, like I said, it goes hand in hand with pyramid schemes, because affinity fraud relies on the trust and friendship that the criminal can build with groups of people that he claims to have something in common with. So in the situation where we look at the Ponzi scheme that was committed by Mr. Lewandowski, he was an entertainer and he got a couple of his fans to invest, and then it went on from there. You know, friends told friends, and the reality was, it was that sense of trust, because Jan was a person, he was an entertainer, people could trust him, they really loved him and the art that he created. But we also see affinity fraud in church organizations or civic clubs, golf clubs. So we have to be aware that just because someone gives us a fancy flyer that guarantees a high rate of return, we need to be aware of the fact that we have to do our homework, and we have to verify not only the person who's offering the investment, but the investment itself. And we're going to talk about that in a few slides. But I just wanted to make sure that, you know, affinity fraud happens. We have the sense of trust with an organization that we belong to, and then suddenly someone is offering us an investment that has those really great higher rates of return than what is considered normal. Those are all red flags that we should be aware of. So with affinity fraud, someone that you just recently met may encourage you to try this new investment because that's what they've been able to earn money on. But maybe they aren't able to provide you with the written information about the investment. You know, if someone's offering you an investment, you need to be able to take a look at that prospectus. The prospectus gives you all the information that you need to make an informed decision. But before you actually trust the information on the prospectus, you want to verify that it's a real prospectus, because I can create something that looks very similar, but it may not be actually registered. And as I said, we'll talk about that in a few slides. But another red flag that we should be aware of is that, you know, we're told, like we saw in Polka King, you know, everyone else is doing it, and so we want in. Again, it's that affinity fraud, that sense that we can trust this because of the types of people who we know, and they're investing as well. So that's something we have to be aware of. The next type of fraud, whoops. So some tips to avoid affinity fraud. Make sure that you check everything out, no matter how well you know the person who's trying to get you to invest, because it may be other people who have experience with a specific investment, but maybe they're being victimized as well and they don't know it. So we also want to be wary of any promises for much higher returns. And, you know, the reality is that the investments on average tend to have a rate of return of somewhere between 8 and 10% if you look at the market over history. If someone is promising you a guaranteed rate of return of 13 or more percent, that's got to be a red flag. And so we want to make sure that we are aware of that. And then we want to also be aware that fraudsters use email and other virtual connections in order to try to get people to, invest their hard-earned money. And so there is a question about digital prospectus and whether or not it's easier to fake them. The reality is I don't know that it's any easier to fake them now than it was before they were digital, because it's just easy to do. I'm going to provide you with the Securities and Exchanges website, the SEC's website, in a few slides, and I'll show you where you can actually type that information in, and you can compare the prospectus that you're looking at to what the SEC has on file, and that's going to be your best bet. So let's move on and talk about free lunch seminars. How many of you have received that flashy postcard in the mail? And you can just type in the chat feature or raise your hands. We see that so often. We actually see people. I have 3 of them sitting on my home, on my buffet at home, where it's this invitation to attend this great opportunity to learn about something. So the reality is, again, that free lunch thing, that's got to be a red flag. They often will promise that there's no sales pitches. There's not going to be any, you don't have to buy anything. But the reality is that once you sit down, we've actually had people tell us that once they sat down at that fancy restaurant, they were told they couldn't even have a beverage until they listened to the sales pitch. So we need to be aware that even if the advertisement tells us that there's no sales happening at the dinner, the reality is that often before you even get home, you're going to start getting phone calls or text messages from people offering you these great opportunities. And it's not always investment. Sometimes it's insurance, sometimes it's, different things. The reality is that we need to be aware of, because there's really nothing in this world that is free. Everything comes with a price. So the red flags that we want to be aware of when it comes to those free lunch or free dinners, again, the people who are offering the meal are sparing no expense. They may put it in the local paper. They may actually buy a billboard and advertise this free dinner or free lunch. Sometimes they're on the radio and they want to give you this free advice. And they're going to guarantee you that these high rates of return. But the reality is, again, there's no such thing as free. And with that comes an issue where we need to be aware of the fact that, yeah, we can absolutely enjoy that meal. However, we have to be prepared to deal with the consequence. One of the AARP volunteers that I've worked with was telling me about a free dinner that she had gone to, where the salesperson was offering an annuity. Now, annuities are a beast of their own, and they tend to be kind of confusing. Often they are not even really an investment. It's an insurance product. So this woman was offered an annuity where she would have to invest a pretty big chunk of money in order to buy the policy. And when she did the math, she would have had to live to be 109 or 110 years old in order for that annuity, for her to have actually been able to get the money that she paid into the annuity product. So again, that free lunch isn't free when you have to deal with the consequence of the incessant phone calls or the high pressure. You can't have this meal until you listen to our sales pitch. So we have to make sure that we're aware of that as well. All right, so let's talk now about some of those more complicated scams. The first thing I want to talk about is a pump and dump scam. So what happens with a pump and dump is people who hold the investments, for a specific company. They talk up the changes that are being expected for this company. They're about to release this great new product. They're about to show that they've made all this money. So they pump it up. They make the value of the stock artificially inflate. And then when the value of that stock is much higher, those people who are committing the scam sell all of their stock at a higher price. And the reality is that the company isn't really about to do anything spectacular. So like I said, there's two pieces to a pump and dump scam. You've got your stockholders who are saying that something is going to happen with this company. The stock goes up, the demand gets higher, and that person who sells who started the rumor basically sells to make a huge profit. And then what happens is the value of the stock goes back down, and those who bought when the stock price was really high end up losing out in the end. So we need to be aware of that. Once that stock increases, the stockholders are going to sell, and they're going to make that profit and leave the new stockholders holding the bag. We need to know that these types of scams typically involve small capital companies. They may involve a newer company, or maybe it was a company that was struggling to thrive. And I think that, recently there was an example of that we can all think about. We often find the information about pump and dump scams on the internet, or it can actually involve cold calling, and this is what I think fascinates me, where the perpetrator of the scam will call and leave a message for Joe. And, maybe they leave a message on Katrina's phone. Hey, Joe, this is Fred. And I just wanted to let you know about this investment, the stock that I just bought. They're about to release this great new product. And if you want the opportunity to get in on it, here's how you can do it. So they pretend to dial, they leave a message on a wrong number, and maybe the person on the other end gets that message and decides to invest a bunch of money. They think it's a tip that they end up getting, but it's really not. It's just a scam phone call. We've all been receiving calls from the extended warranty on our cars. We've received calls about the IRS. This is just another call that we may have to field and try to figure out what's right and what's wrong. So we want to keep that in mind as well. So the red flags of a pump and dump scam involve unsolicited investment opportunities. They may come by mail, email, or even on social media. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. If it sounds too good to be true, it really probably is. That's something that I think is fascinating, because I didn't quite understand what that meant as a kid until I started working for the Department of Banking, when I realized just how many frauds and scams there are out there. As I said, it's typically a small company, one that may not have a lot of history or a lot of public information that may be involved in a pump and dump. But we have to keep in mind, the company itself may not be the one who's committing the scam. They may not be aware of the situation at all. So we have to keep in mind that too good to be true mentality, and we have to, make sure that we are very careful with making those types of investments. All right, so the next type of scam that I want to talk about is a promissory note scam. And this, again, is another scam that actually has been a part of Pennsylvania has had some headlines about promissory notes in the last couple of years. So basically, it's a promise to repay a defined amount of money. It's basically an IOU for a business. And there are real promissory notes, but they're only offered to what is considered a sophisticated investor. An individual who can invest in a promissory note has to have a high net worth, and they have to have experience. You have to become certified in investing in order to be able to invest in a promissory note. They're also made available to institutional investors, but basically it's an IOU. And the problem is the underlying asset. So if I write out a promissory note that I'm going to promise to repay you, but there's nothing that holds the value, that there's nothing of value affiliated with that promissory note, and the criminal just makes away with the money. That's what we need to be aware of with the promissory notes. So fraudsters actually will convince people to buy these notes, guaranteeing them, marketing them that they're safe and dependable. And a lot of times the rates of return, the promised rates of return are as much as 20 to 30%. So that's a huge red flag. Legitimate promissory notes, they are a security and they have to be registered through the SEC. And I'm going to actually, the next slide is where we're going to talk about how to verify any type of security that we've talked about, as whether it's a stock investment, whether it is, the investment of a lifetime that's actually a Ponzi scheme. We're actually able to verify with the Securities and Exchange Commission whether or not those are all real investment opportunities. And the thing that we have to keep in mind, whether we're talking about promissory notes, pump and dumps, affinity fraud, Ponzi schemes, they all have to be licensed. They all have to be registered. And the reality is that any type of security has a risk for losing money. The only thing that's guaranteed is a savings account. Anything else, the reality is that when we look at investing, we're investing money in a company that could potentially fail. And we've seen it time and time again, where a company that's been in business, particularly through the pandemic, we've seen companies that have been in business for long periods of time. And when something like a pandemic hits, nothing is guaranteed. So we have to keep that in mind. So let's talk about the red flags of a promissory note scam. Again, that guaranteed rate of return. With a security, particularly a promissory note or a stock investment, there's always a risk and you're never guaranteed a specific rate of return. You may have that guarantee with a bond, but there's always that risk that even a bond could not at the end pay off. So we have to keep that in mind. They're marketed, promissory notes are marketed as a risk-free note. Again, there's always a risk that the company isn't going to be able to repay its debt. Just like those of us, if we take a look again at the pandemic, we see that, people who have really never struggled financially, maybe they lost their jobs, maybe, something happened and suddenly they're not able to make ends meet. The same happens with businesses. So we have to keep that in mind. Another red flag that we need to be aware of is that it's a short-term offer. The company is typically going to guarantee that repayment in a small amount of time that's typically less than 6 to 9 months. So again, that quick turnaround on that is another thing that we need to be aware of with a promissory note scam. So the last type of scam that I want to talk about before we move into the resources and how you can learn more, as well as how to verify information, is a prime bank investment fraud. That's a term that's given to fraud schemes that go by many different other names, like prime bank guarantees. You can see the whole list here. There's a huge amount of different types of investment frauds that fall under that category for prime bank. And again, the reality is that there are these types of investments available, but it's not available to the public. It is something that they don't exist for the public, but they also tell you that you can't tell anyone about this. If you do, you're going to be kicked out of the opportunity. And the reality is that federal and international officials or governments don't endorse these types of investments either. They're often marketed that you have to be super wealthy, but here's this opportunity for you because you're very special. But you can see here that they actually sometimes even in the name, like you see the discounted US Treasury security or the International Monetary Fund. They try to give us that sense of security by adding the words international or national to make us think that they're government backed, and they're not. So we have to keep that in mind too. So there really is no prime bank investments, although criminals like to make it look like they're legitimate. Again, it's easy to create information that looks legitimate. So make sure if you are offered a prime bank investment, again, that you remember that there's no such thing as a prime bank investment fraud. And again, they go by all of these different names that we need to be aware of. So the red flags that we want to be aware of, sometimes people will say that this person is also investing in these prime bank scams, and they'll name drop. They'll use the name of well-known investors. And there's not much information about the investment itself. It's sort of the sketchy, here's this opportunity, but it's top secret, so I can't tell you about it. But again, there's always that promise for a really high rate of return that's guaranteed. So if we hear high rates of return and guaranteed in the same sentence, that needs to be a red flag for any type of investment that we're considering. So let's talk then about the common red flags of investment fraud, because, hopefully you saw as we were talking about some of the specific investment frauds, you saw the trend in, everyone else is doing it. Here's this great opportunity, or they're guaranteeing those high rates of return. Keep in mind, again, that returns on investment on average for the stock market are 8 to 10%. If someone's promising you 15, 20, 30% guaranteed, those are two red flags that we need to be aware of. One red flag that we haven't really talked about is that sometimes investors are asked to pay in a non-traditional way. So maybe you'll be asked to wire transfer the money, or you might be asked to go out and buy gift cards for Apple or iTunes so that you can invest in ABC fake bakery. That's definitely a non-traditional way of investing. Be aware that once you wire transfer money, you're not going to get it back. If you buy gift cards, as soon as you provide the numbers on the back and the front of that gift card, that money is gone and it can't be replaced. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about investment frauds and scams. But it's really, really important that victims of frauds, of investment scams, speak up. Because what happens is, and I've been working for the Department of Banking for 16 years now. And if government doesn't know about a problem, there's nothing that we can do to put a stop to it. The same goes with investment scams. If the regulators don't know, if the Department of Banking and Securities doesn't know, if the Securities and Exchange Commission doesn't know, we can't educate the public and maybe try to find the bad guys. So it's really important, if you become a victim or you're presented with the prime bank scam opportunity, it's really important that you report that information. And so on this slide, you can see the Securities and Exchange Commission's website, sec.gov/TCR is the place where you want to report suspected investment fraud. You can also call 800 PA Banks. When you call my office, a real life person answers the line, and they're able to get your information. They'll talk to you about what's happening. And then if they're not the right place, they'll offer you the resource that you need to file in the appropriate place. So again, make sure that you're speaking up and you are not just ignoring it or trying to deal with the fraud on your own. So I mentioned on several of the slides that we have to verify the investment offering itself. So you can actually search through EDGAR, which is the Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis, and Retrieval database that is run by the Securities and Exchange Commission. If you go to sec.gov, in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, there's a search button. It's easier to search the name of the investment opportunity than to try to remember the website that you see there. Now, you will be able to get this website because, as I said, I'm going to be sending the slides to Victoria, so you can see the actual link. But if you go to the sec.gov website, type in the name of the investment that you're considering, and it's going to bring up the history for that investment. If it's not a legitimate investment, you're not going to find it on the EDGAR database. But when you go into the EDGAR database, it's going to give you everything that the company has filed through the Securities and Exchange Commission that is public record. So all of their annual reports, all of the information about the main officers, all of that information is provided in the Security and Exchange's EDGAR database. And you can see the history. So you can see the prospectus, you can see those annual reports, you can see their profit and loss statements. It's amazing what information you can find. So if you're considering an investment opportunity, whether it's legitimate or not, it's a good idea to check the EDGAR filings so that you can make that informed decision about how you want to invest your hard-earned money. So if you're using an investment professional, whether it is a broker-dealer, whether it is an investment advisor, whether it's a financial advisor, you name it, they have to be registered through BrokerCheck, and that's at FINRA's website. So you can go to brokercheck.finra.org and type in the name of the professional that you're using or the professional that you're considering, and it will bring up the history of that person. It will tell you how long they've been licensed. It will tell you if they've had sanctions or complaints. It will tell you, what I think is really cool is it gives you their job history for even before they were investment professionals. So if the person that you're working with has only been in business for a couple of years, you can see what they did before that, which can help us to make a decision about whether or not we want to trust our hard-earned money with that specific professional. So I would encourage you, if you're going to be buying and selling, you have to have that middle person. So I would encourage you to verify the person as well as the firm that you're considering using. So on BrokerCheck, you can actually click on different tabs. You can see here on the screen, the first tab is to search for individual information. And the second tab is to actually find information about the firm itself. These are all really great resources. And I would encourage you to investigate before you invest. So all of the different scams that we've talked about, you want to, if someone is offering you the investment of a lifetime, number one, make sure it's a legitimate investment. And number two, make sure it's a legitimate person who actually has the ability to allow you, to help you buy that stock or investment that you're looking to invest in. So again, that is brokercheck.finra.org. And here's the link to that as well. So we are coming up on 9:42. I always like to provide more resources. So the Securities and Exchange Commission, and we've talked about them quite a bit. That's where you can go to find the EDGAR information about the investment opportunities. But they also have a website that's dedicated for investors, and that's investor.gov. So you can learn more. I have had lots of, I do a lot of webinars and I do a lot of research. And the reality is that I could talk for days about all of this stuff, but I only have so much time. So the Securities and Exchange Commission has some great information at investor.gov. We talked about broker check and the ability to check the history for your investment professional. InvestRight is actually a website that comes from Canada, but it is a really great resource to learn more about other types of investments. So make sure that you check that website out as well. As I mentioned, our consumer services office, when you dial 800 PA Banks, a live person answers your call. So you're not going to have to push 1 for this or 2 for that. Our staff are professionally trained to provide you with quick answers. They can also help you with understanding what may be happening. The Department of Banking and Securities licenses investment professionals, check cashers, pawn shops, car dealerships, mortgage companies, mortgage servicers. We also have more than 200 banks and credit unions that are chartered by the department. So we cover a vast area of financial companies, whether it is a non-bank lender, a financial institution, or investment professional. So if you have questions about any of those things, you can call 800 PA Banks, and during regular business hours, a real life person should answer your call. If by chance all of our staff are on other calls, you'll be asked to leave a message, and they typically return calls within 24 to 48 business hours. So keep that in mind when you are looking for more information or you have questions about an opportunity. And so speaking of questions, I see that there are a couple of questions in the chat box. Number one is about cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency, by and large, is a buyer beware kind of situation. Cryptocurrency is pretty much unregulated in Pennsylvania. There are other states that are trying to wrap their heads around how to regulate cryptocurrency, but to my knowledge, there aren't any government entities that are doing a good job of it. There's a lot of talk about who should be the regulator, but for now, cryptocurrency is sort of the wild, wild west when it comes to investing. And I won't even pretend to have a strong understanding of it. The way that I understand cryptocurrency is there's not really any money involved, that it's all a spreadsheet on the internet. It's verified by other people, but the reality is I don't know a lot about it. It is unregulated in Pennsylvania, and the department's official stance is we don't have a position at this point. And so there's another question, am I securities licensed? I am not. I am the investor education coordinator here at the department. So I provide information. I don't provide any type of advice or anything that would require that I be licensed with the SEC or the department. Are there any other questions? We've got about 13 minutes left. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Can we just ask them instead of typing them?
Absolutely, I'm fine with that. Victoria, would you mind going ahead and stopping the recording if we're going to open it up to live questions?